If you, as a fully grown adult, decide to go to bed at like 1 in the morning instead of your usual 10 o'clock, the math the next morning is pretty simple.
Right, you just sleep in.
Exactly. I mean, your body needs rest. You went to bed late, so you wake up late. It is this very linear, logical equation.
Yeah.
But, and this is where it gets wild, if you take a 4-month-old baby and you keep them awake until 11 at night.
Oh, they do not sleep in.
They do not. They will wake up at 5 in the morning, absolutely screaming. The math is just, it's completely broken.
Yeah, it really is. And suddenly you realize that all the logic you apply to your own human body, it just does not apply to this new one you brought home.
Which is, well, welcome to the deep dive, because this topic, infant sleep, it is arguably the single highest stress area for new parents, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's the ultimate shock to the system.
Yeah.
Whether you're a parent or just someone studying early human development, it's jarring.
Yeah, and it's shrouded in so much conflicting advice. So today, our mission for you, the listener, is to kind of cut through all that noise. We are pulling from a massive stack of pediatric sleep research, biological studies, behavioral frameworks, basically. We have this comprehensive document we're unpacking today.
And we really need to look at the actual mechanics of what is happening inside a baby's brain and body. We have to look at the biology.
Right, because if you look at the landscape of advice out there, there is this fundamental tension. On one side, you have this idea that you need to act like a drill sergeant.
Right, the strict schedule approach.
Yeah, that you have to impose this rigid discipline and force a baby onto a strict clock. But the research we are diving into today poses this brilliant counterargument, which is, what if infant sleep isn't about rigid discipline at all? What if it's entirely about biological alignment?
Which is such a vital framing.
Aye.
Biological alignment. Because the overarching answer to that tension, drill sergeant versus the biologist, the research shows it is overwhelmingly biology.
So we aren't fighting the baby.
No, not at all. You are trying to align with a system that is, well, currently under construction. Structure, schedules, these routines we obsess over, they are simply tools we use to work with that underlying biology.
They are not the biology itself.
Exactly. And if you try to use the tool before the biology is ready, you're going to drive yourself insane. Which, I mean, that brings us to the biggest misconception we see in the research right out of the gate.
The myth of the day one schedule.
Yes, the myth of the day one schedule.
I think there is this cultural expectation that you bring a newborn home from the hospital, you pull out a spreadsheet, and you say, okay, breakfast is at 7 a.m., nap time is at 10 a.m., let's execute.
And it completely fails. It always fails. Because biologically, a strict schedule for a newborn is a physiological impossibility.
Wait, let's pause right there. Why is it a physiological impossibility? Because, I mean, I know people who swear they had their 3-week-old on a schedule. Are they just lucky, or are they misinterpreting what's happening?
They are definitely misinterpreting patterns for a schedule.
Yeah.
If we look at the chronological breakdown of human sleep development, those first 0 to 2 months, there is no schedule. It is pure survival.
Pure survival. Yeah.
At birth, babies simply do not have a mature circadian rhythm, period.
And the circadian rhythm, that's the internal clock, right?
Right. It's that 24-hour biological clock that relies heavily on environmental cues, mostly light and dark, to tell the brain when to be awake and when to sleep.
Okay.
In adults, this is regulated by the pineal gland. It produces melatonin in the dark, and it suppresses it in the light.
So you're saying a newborn's brain it doesn't have that hardware turned on yet?
Not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. In utero, the baby relied entirely on the mother's melatonin crossing the placenta.
Oh, wow. Never thought about that.
Right. So once they are born, that supply is instantly cut off. Their own pineal gland is incredibly immature. They literally cannot chemically differentiate between noon and midnight.
That is mind-blowing. So when a parent is frustrated that their 3-week-old is just wide awake at 3 in the morning, they aren't being stubborn. They literally lack the neurochemical ability to know it is nighttime.
That is precisely it. It's like trying to program a computer that hasn't even been plugged into the wall yet.
That is a great analogy.
The research points out that it isn't until around 6 to 8 weeks of age that the rhythms of melatonin, the sleep hormone and cortisol, the stress and wake hormone, even begin to form their own independent cyclical patterns.
Okay, so 0 to 2 months, it's just pure survival. You are just responding to their physical needs as they happen. Then we hit that 2 to 4 month window.
Right.
The research calls this the gentle emergence of structure. This is when that internal clock is finally starting to boot up.
Yes, exactly. They start getting more sensitive to light exposure. Morning sunlight starts to gently program that circadian rhythm. You begin to see patterns emerge. Maybe they naturally start taking a longer nap in the mid-morning.
But it's still kind of variable.
Very variable. It is really that 4 to 6 month window where the neurological hardware is finally mature enough that a true, consistent, day-to-day schedule becomes possible.
Which brings us to the elephant in the room, the milestone that strikes absolute terror into the hearts of parents everywhere.
The 4-month sleep regression.
Yes, the 4-month sleep regression. I mean, you hear these stories of parents who had a baby sleeping beautifully for 3 months, and then right around 4 months, it's like a bomb goes off.
Total chaos.
They're waking up every 45 minutes. What is physically happening in the brain at 4 months?
Well, to understand the regression, the research suggests we actually have to rethink the word regression entirely.
Okay.
It's actually the most significant neurological progression in a baby's early life. We can look at it like a massive operating system upgrade.
Okay, unpack that OS upgrade for me. What was the old operating system doing?
So the newborn operating system is designed purely for survival and rapid growth. Their sleep architecture is very, very simple.
Simple how?
They spend a massive amount of time in what is called active sleep, which is similar to adult REM sleep, and they drop into deep sleep very quickly. That's why you can have a newborn fall asleep in a loud, bright restaurant, and you can pass them around to 5 different relatives and they don't even twitch.
Exactly. Their sleep is deep, it's heavy, and it's somewhat random.
But then the upgrade hits.
The upgrade hits around 4 months. Their sleep architecture matures to become adult-like. Instead of just heavy, random sleep, they start sleeping in distinct cycles.
Right.
They go from light sleep down into deep sleep, and then, crucially, they come back up to light sleep before starting the next cycle.
Just like adults do. I mean, we all wake up slightly between sleep cycles in the middle of the night. We fluff our pillow, maybe pull up the blanket and go back to sleep. We just don't remember it.
Right, it's automatic for us, but for a 4-month-old, this cyclical waking is brand new. They come up into that light sleep phase, and their brain suddenly checks its surroundings.
And this is where the trouble starts. Their new adult-like sleep system is now highly sensitive to habits, environment, and timing.
So if they fell asleep being rocked in a parent's arms, and then they naturally wake up slightly at the end of a sleep cycle, like 45 minutes later, and they are suddenly alone in a flat, still crib.
The brain sounds an alarm.
But the brain absolutely sounds an alarm. It says, wait, the conditions have changed. I was warm and moving. Now I am flat and still. This is not safe.
Wow.
And because they don't yet have the practice skill to transition themselves back into the next sleep cycle, they fully wake up and cry for the parent to recreate those original conditions.
It's like the new operating system requires a password every time a sleep cycle restarts, and the parent is the only one who has the password.
That is a brilliant way to put it, yes.
That is such a clarifying way to look at it. It's not a regression, it's an awakening to their environment. But this brings me to a detail in the research that I found genuinely fascinating because it feels completely backward to me.
Oh, about the daytime schedule. Yes. The data shows that sleeping through the night is not a prerequisite for a daytime schedule.
It's a very common trap, yeah. Parents think, well, my baby was up 4 times last night. There's no way we can force a daytime schedule today. We just had to let them sleep whenever they want to catch up.
They view sleeping through the night as the starting line.
When in reality, the research says daytime structure is what actually builds the capacity to sleep through the night.
So it's the exact opposite of what you'd intuitively think.
Precisely. If we look at the hormonal regulation we discussed earlier, daytime light exposure, consistent feeding times, and structured daytime wakefulness are the very things that program the circadian rhythm.
Right.
If you let a baby sleep all day because they had a bad night, you are robbing their brain of the cues it needs to organize its nighttime sleep.
I was trying to wrap my head around this, and the analogy that makes the most sense to me is laying down train tracks.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, you have a destination in mind. You want the train to reach sleeping through the night, but you can't just teleport the train there. You have to lay down the tracks first.
Right.
The research outlines this progression. Rhythm leads to predictability, which eventually leads to longer sleep. The daytime schedule is the track. You lay it down day after day, and eventually the neurological train reaches the destination.
And that explains why a 5-month-old baby might still wake up twice a night to feed, but can still thrive on a highly predictable daytime nap schedule.
Yes.
The daytime rhythm is regulating their energy and hormones, preventing them from becoming chronically overtired.
Which is such a massive relief for you listening right now. If you are exhausted
Yeah.
and your baby is not sleeping through the night, you are not failing at daytime structure. You are just laying the tracks.
Exactly.
But this begs the question, If we aren't using a strict, rigid clock to lay these tracks, especially in those early months, what is the actual mechanism driving the day?
This is where we shift from looking at the clock on the wall to looking at the biological clock inside the baby. The core engine driving a baby's day is a concept known as the wake window.
Wake windows. I feel like this is the holy grail of infant sleep research. What exactly is happening biologically during a wake window?
So a wake window is the finite amount of time a baby's neurological system can tolerate being awake and processing sensory information before their biological drive for sleep becomes overwhelming.
Okay.
It is driven by two main factors: the buildup of adenosine, which we call sleep pressure, and the management of cortisol, the stress hormone.
Okay, let's break that down because the specific numbers provided in the research are shocking if you've never seen them before.
They are very short.
Let's look at the 0 to 2 month phase. The maximum wake window is only 45 to 90 minutes. That feels impossibly short. I mean, by the time you wake them up, change a diaper, feed them, and burp them, you are already at 45 minutes.
It is incredibly brief, but you have to consider what is happening in a newborn's brain. Every single photon of light hitting their eyes, every sound, every change in temperature, every touch, it is all brand new data that their brain has to process.
Well, it must be exhausting.
The neural firing is intense. This rapid processing burns energy and builds up adenosine very quickly. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter that essentially inhibits wakefulness. As it builds up, the sleep pressure becomes physically heavy.
So they literally max out their processing power in under an hour and a half.
Basically, yes.
What happens as they grow?
As the brain matures and becomes more efficient at processing the world, the windows extend. By 2 to 4 months, the wake window is roughly 1 to 2 hours. From 4 to 6 months, we're looking at an hour and a half to 2.5 hours.
Okay.
And by 6 to 9 months, it stretches to 2 to 3 hours.
So here's the crucial question, and this goes back to that math equation we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive. What happens if we miss the window? Let's say I have a 3-month-old. Their window is about 90 minutes. But we're out at the grocery store, or friends are over, and the baby stays awake for 2.5 hours.
Right.
The logical adult brain says, great, they are super tired now, they are going to crash and sleep amazingly. But what does the biological data say?
The biological data says you have just triggered a chemical cascade that will actively fight sleep.
Why? What is the evolutionary benefit of that? Because it seems like a terrible design flaw.
It comes back to cortisol. When the adenosine buildup, that sleep pressure, reaches its peak at the end of a wake window, the brain signals that it is time to shut down and recover.
Right.
If the baby is kept awake past that biological limit, the brain assumes there must be a vital, survival-based reason why sleep is not happening.
Yeah.
It perceives the prolonged wakefulness as a threat.
It assumes there is a predator or an emergency.
Exactly. The brain says, we must be in danger. So to protect the organism, the adrenal glands release a surge of cortisol and adrenaline. This flushes the system with artificial energy to keep the baby alert and alive through the perceived emergency.
Oh, wow. So when people say their baby caught a second wind, they are literally watching an adrenaline and cortisol spike override the baby's natural need for sleep.
Yes. And the insidious thing about cortisol is that it takes time for the liver to process and clear it from the bloodstream.
It doesn't just vanish.
Right, it has a half-life. You can't just flip a switch and turn off a cortisol spike. Once that hormone is in the system, it actively blocks the baby's ability to settle.
This explains the absolute misery of the overtired baby. They are exhausted, their eyes are heavy, but their nervous system is vibrating with stress hormones.
It is a terrible feeling for them.
They fight sleep, they thrash, they cry, and even when they finally do fall asleep, the lingering cortisol makes their sleep incredibly light and fragmented. They wake up 20 minutes later because the chemical alarm bells are still ringing.
That is the biological consequence of missing the wake window. And it highlights why observing the baby's specific cues is so much more important than just watching the clock.
I want to push back on the keys, though, because this is a point of massive frustration for parents.
Oh, absolutely.
The research explicitly states that crying is a late sign of fatigue. If you wait for the baby to cry or fuss or rub their eyes aggressively, you have already missed the window and the cortisol is starting to flow.
Exactly.
But what if the baby just doesn't look tired before that? You hit that 90-minute mark and they are wide-eyed, staring around, seemingly totally fine. Do you really force them into a dark room?
You don't force them, but you absolutely have to intervene because of a phenomenon the research calls late-stage overtired equals wired.
Late-stage overtired equals wired.
Yes. Many babies mask their fatigue with hyper-alertness. They look engaged, but their autonomic nervous system is actually starting to crash.
So what are the actual early biological cues we should be looking for? If it's not crying, what is it?
The early cues are much more subtle and physiological. The research lists slower, uncoordinated movements. The baby might start zoning out, staring blankly at a wall or a ceiling fan.
Okay, the zoning out. I've seen that.
They become less engaged with faces. And one of the most specific, reliable indicators mentioned is red eyebrows or red eyelids.
Red eyelids. I found that detail so fascinating when reading the sources. That isn't just a cute quirk. That's literally the vascular system reacting to fatigue, right?
Yes, blood flow changes as fatigue sets in and the body prepares for sleep, often pooling slightly around the eyes and brow. So if you see a baby staring blankly with pinkish eyelids, even if they aren't making a single sound of complaint, their brain is practically begging for sleep.
That is such a vital piece of diagnostic information. You see the red eyelids, you note that it's been 85 minutes, and you immediately initiate the sleep routine before the cortisol emergency alarm gets pulled.
That is rhythm-based scheduling in action. You are letting the biology lead. And this rhythm naturally compounds as the day goes on, which brings us to the most critical wake window of all, the one that ends the day.
The bedtime debate. Section 2, the research dives heavily into this, and it is a fascinating area because the data is incredibly definitive.
Yes, it doesn't leave much room for argument.
There are objective biological differences in bedtimes. We are talking about the difference between a 7:00 p.m. bedtime, a 9:00 p.m. bedtime, and an 11:00 p.m. bedtime. Is there a universally correct time?
From a purely biological and evolutionary standpoint, yes.
Yeah.
The research shows that infant circadian rhythms naturally align very closely with the solar cycle.
The solar cycle.
Right. Melatonin naturally begins its steepest rise in the baby's brain as dusk approaches, typically falling between 6:00 p.m. and 8:00 p.m.
So an earlier bedtime, in that 6:00 p.m. window, allows you to surf that natural wave of melatonin.
Exactly. You're putting them down right as their natural sleep pressure and melatonin levels intersect perfectly and before the evening cortisol spike can happen.
And what's the result of that?
The result is easier falling asleep, deeper initial sleep architecture, and a significantly longer first stretch of uninterrupted sleep.
But modern life doesn't always accommodate a 7:00 p.m. bedtime. I mean, parents work late, commutes are long. So what happens if you push it to a mid-range bedtime, say 8:00 to 10:00 p.m.?
A mid-range bedtime can work for some families, particularly if the baby's daytime wake windows naturally shifted later, or if they took a solid late afternoon nap.
Right.
However, the data notes it carries a progressively higher risk of catching an overtired window.
But then we get to the late bedtime, 11:00 p.m. to 1:00 a.m. And here is where we return to that broken math equation we opened with.
Yes.
The research presents a surprising, almost brutal fact. A later bedtime does not equal a later wake-up time.
It is perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of infant biology. Logic dictates that a baby who goes to bed 2 hours later will sleep 2 hours later in the morning.
Right, because that's what we do.
But biology dictates that a baby going to bed at 11:00 p.m. is profoundly overtired.
Because they have blown past the 7:00 p.m. melatonin wave, and they have been surviving on cortisol for 4 hours.
Precisely. Their system is flooded with stress hormones. So when they finally do fall asleep at 11:00 p.m., their sleep cycles are shallow and fragmented. They lack the deep, restorative, slow-wave sleep that characterizes the early part of the night.
And then what happens in the morning?
Because their circadian rhythm is still programmed to wake with the morning light, they often wake up earlier than if they had gone to bed at 7 p.m.
They wake up at 5 a.m., wired, exhausted, and incapable of going back to sleep because their cortisol is still high. It is a vicious cycle.
Which is why the research establishes that wake time, ideally falling in a biologically appropriate window of 6:00 a.m. to 8:00 a.m., must be the anchor of the day.
So you set that morning anchor by exposing them to light, you follow the wake windows dynamically throughout the day, and you aim to land the plane during that biologically aligned melatonin window of 6:00 p.m. to 8:00 p.m.
It's a beautifully closed biological loop.
But of course, understanding the timing is only half the battle, because if biology demands a 7:00 p.m. bedtime, that introduces a massive practical problem for the family.
The logistics of the evening.
Right. At 7:00 p.m., the parents are still awake, they're cooking dinner, the TV is on, the dog is barking, which forces us to look at the actual geography of where this baby is sleeping.
The physical environment, The space where sleep happens is just as critical as the timing, and the research shows that this physical space must evolve in direct tandem with the baby's physical development.
Let's break down the primary sleep vessels discussed in the data, the bassinet versus the crib. Because they are not just different sized beds, they serve entirely different developmental purposes.
They do. A bassinet is specifically engineered for the newborn stage. It is small, portable, usually has a very firm, thin mattress and shallow sides. It is designed to be placed immediately next to the parent's bed.
It essentially mimics the womb. It's tight, it's enclosed, and it allows for constant proximity.
Right. But a crib is a completely different piece of architecture. It is large, stationary, with high sides and a thicker mattress. It provides real estate.
Real estate for moving around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is designed for a human being who's going to be moving around during cyclical sleep.
So the transition from bassinet to crib is a major milestone. And the research points out that this transition isn't just about age, say, arbitrarily doing it at 4 months. It is triggered by specific biological and physical limits.
The primary triggers are physical capability and weight. Most bassinets have a strict weight limit, often around 15 to 20 pounds, because the structural integrity isn't meant for heavier loads.
That makes sense.
But the more urgent trigger is mobility. The moment a baby begins showing signs of rolling over or pushing up on their hands and knees, the bassinet becomes an immediate safety hazard. The shallow sides are no longer sufficient to contain a mobile infant.
And there is a third really interesting trigger the data mentions. Sometimes the baby just outgrows the space dimensionally. As they go through that 4-month OS upgrade and start cycling through sleep, they move more. They stretch out, their hands hit the mesh sides of the small bassinet, and the physical restriction startles them awake.
They literally need the square footage of a crib to execute a full sleep cycle without waking themselves up.
Which brings up the most contentious environmental issue in the entire body of research. Because moving to a crib often coincides with moving the baby out of the parent's room and into their own room.
Right.
And this is an area heavily governed by objective pediatric safety guidelines.
It is essential to look at the data driving those guidelines. The primary recommendation for pediatric organizations is room sharing, which strictly means sleeping in the same room on a separate surface, not bed sharing, for at least the first 6 months and ideally up to a year.
And the data behind this is entirely focused on reducing the risk of sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDs. But I want to understand the mechanism here. Why does sleeping in the same room as a parent reduce SIDs? Is it just because the parent is there to notice if something goes wrong?
It is far more biological than that. The leading theory supported by the research is that the ambient noise and movement of the parents, a cough, rolling over in bed, shifting blankets, acts almost like an external metronome for the baby's autonomic nervous system.
Wait, really? The noise of the parents keeps the baby's systems running?
In a way, yes. Remember that a young infant's brain is still learning to regulate continuous respiration and heart rate during deep sleep.
Okay.
If an infant is placed in a completely silent, isolated room, they can sometimes fall into an abnormally deep, unarousable state of sleep. The ambient noise of the parent sleeping nearby causes microarousals in the baby's brain.
Microarousals.
Right. It prevents them from sinking into a state of sleep so deep that their immature brain forgets to send the signal to breathe.
That is incredible. So we actually want their sleep to be microscopically interrupted by our presence early on. It is a protective mechanism.
Exactly. However, the research also acknowledges a massive practical internal tension for parents around the 4 to 6 month mark.
Because the baby's brain changes.
Yes. At this age, the baby's sleep architecture has matured. They no longer need that protective interruption. In fact, the parent's ambient noise is now fully waking the baby up between sleep cycles.
And the parents are exhausted because every time the baby grunts, the parent wakes up. The room sharing becomes mutually detrimental to everyone's sleep quality.
This is where parents often struggle with the transition to an independent room. The data highlights a psychological hurdle. Many parents feel that the small bassinet right next to the bed feels safer than a giant crib down the hall.
I really want to explore this feeling versus objective safety because it makes sense emotionally. A tiny, cozy basket next to you feels safe. But the research points to the safe sleep checklist to define what objective safety actually is.
Objective safety is not about proximity. It's about environment. The checklist is rigid. The baby must be on a firm, flat mattress. They must be placed on their back. And the crib must be entirely empty.
Empty meaning no pillows, no blankets.
No stuffed animals, no bumper pads. Just a tight-fitting sheet.
If you meet those criteria, the large crib in another room is an objectively safe sleep environment.
Yes. What is fascinating about how the research frames this is that moving a baby to their own room isn't an act of abandonment. It is a carefully calibrated progression of autonomy that mirrors their neurological development.
It's a progression of autonomy. I love that framework. The data breaks it down into 3 stages. Stage 1 is proximity, from 0 to roughly 3 months.
Right, where the baby's nervous system is highly immature, they regulate their heart rate and temperature through closeness to the caregiver.
Stage 2 is supported independence, from 3 to 6 months. Their systems are stabilizing, they can handle short separations, and they are ready for the structured physical real estate of the crib, even if it's still in the parent's room.
And stage 3 is growing autonomy from 6 months onward. Their sleep cycles are adult-like. They can regulate their own body temperature. At this stage, independent sleep in their own room is biologically appropriate and often leads to better, deeper sleep for both the child and the parent.
So we have established the underlying biology, the engine of the wake windows, and the physical environment where this all takes place. But the theoretical knowledge has to translate into practical execution. How do you actually design the flow of an evening to align all these elements?
Right, we have all this science, but how does it survive a random Tuesday evening in a busy household?
Exactly.
The research provides a very clear, repeatable framework for designing the evening rhythm, aiming for that biological sweet spot of 6:00 p.m. to 8:00 p.m.
The flow begins with what the data calls the anchor point, family dinner. Around 6:00 p.m., the household transitions from daytime activity to evening winding down.
Even if a 4-month-old isn't eating solid food, having them in a high chair or nearby while the family eats sets a reliable environmental cue that the day is ending.
Then, following that anchor from about 6:03 p.m. to 7:15 p.m., we enter the wind-down routine. The research suggests a specific sequence of events, perhaps a warm bath, putting on pajamas, a final feeder bottle, reading a short book, and dimming the lights in the nursery.
And here is where we need to look at the underlying mechanism of this routine. Because the goal of a bedtime routine is widely misunderstood.
This is one of the most illuminating points in the entire dataset. The goal of the bath is not hygiene, and the goal of the book is not literacy.
Exactly. You are not trying to scrub the baby clean, and you are not trying to teach them vocabulary. You are executing a biochemical and psychological sequence.
A biochemical sequence.
Let's take the bath, for example. When a baby is submerged in warm water, their blood vessels dilate, bringing blood to the surface of the skin. When you take them out of the warm water, that heat rapidly dissipates into the air, causing a rapid drop in their core body temperature.
And a drop in core body temperature is the primary biological trigger for the release of melatonin.
Precisely. You are using physics to induce a hormonal response. The dim lights further stimulate that melatonin production. The repetitive sequence of pajamas, feeding, and a book operates as Pavlovian conditioning.
Classical conditioning. You are wiring their brain to recognize a pattern.
Over time, the baby's brain learns that this specific sequence of sensory inputs, the smell of the soap, the feeling of the towel, the sound of a specific lullaby, reliably predicts sleep.
It's preparing them.
Eventually, simply starting their routine begins to lower their heart rate and prepare their nervous system for rest before they ever even enter the crib.
That is a profound way to view a bedtime routine. It's not a chore, it's a biological signaling mechanism. And if you execute that sequence, the baby is ideally asleep by 7:30 p.m. or 8:00 p.m., which leads us to a crucial and frankly deeply validating point in the research: the parent's evening.
This is a vital component of the entire sleep ecosystem. If the baby is asleep by 8:00 p.m., it creates a window of time perhaps from 8:00 p.m. to 10:00 p.m. where the adults are awake and unencumbered.
And the research is so explicit here. This is not a selfish desire on the part of the parents. It is an absolute necessity for the regulation of the adult nervous system.
Infant care requires chronic, high-level vigilance. The adult nervous system is in a constant state of mild sympathetic arousal, always listening for a cry, always anticipating a need.
It's exhausting just being on alert.
Right. That 2-hour window in the evening allows the adult's parasympathetic nervous system to engage. It allows them to decompress, communicate with their partner, and chemically reset before their own sleep cycle begins.
You cannot pour from an empty cup. That evening window is the refill. But returning to the practicalities of a Tuesday night, achieving this separation creates a logistical puzzle.
A very tricky one.
The data outlines a very specific trade-off parents face during the transitional months when they are trying to establish the crib routine, but the crib is in a different room.
The dilemma is this. If you do this beautiful 7:00 p.m. routine and put the baby down in their crib in the nursery to build that good habit, what do you do when you go to sleep at 10:00 p.m., assuming you are still following the room sharing guidelines?
The research maps out three distinct options, and they all have mechanical trade-offs. Option A is to start and stay in the crib. You put the baby down at 7 p.m. in their own room, and you leave them there all night.
The mechanical advantage of option A is uninterrupted consistency. The environment never changes. The baby cycles through sleep in the same place they fell asleep.
But there's a downside.
The disadvantage is that it terminates the protective benefits of room sharing earlier than the 6 to 12-month pediatric guidelines suggest.
Then there is option B. Start in the crib, transfer to the bassinet later, so they get the good routine and sleep in the crib from 7:00 to 10:00 p.m. Then, when the parents are ready for bed, they sneak into the nursery, scoop up the sleeping baby, and transfer them to the bassinet in the master bedroom.
Option B adheres to the safety guidelines of room sharing for the bulk of the night. But the trade-off is severe risk to sleep architecture.
How so?
Moving a sleeping baby is like defusing a bomb. If you accidentally transfer them during a light phase of cyclical sleep, their brain registers the movement, the environmental change, and the temperature drop.
Right.
They wake up fully, the OS password is lost, and you may spend the next hour trying to settle them back down.
Which brings us to option C. Do everything in the bassinet from the start. You bring the baby into the master bedroom at 7:00 p.m., do the routine there, and they sleep in the bassinet all night.
This is the safest and simplest logistical path. But it offers the least amount of physical and auditory separation between the baby's sleep and the parent's evening downtime. You are tiptoeing around your own bedroom at 9:00 p.m. trying not to wake them.
Ultimately, the data suggests there is no perfect answer. It is a constant calibration between objective safety guidelines, the baby's specific temperament, and the parent's sanity. But regardless of which room the baby is in and which bed they are sleeping in, we have to face the inevitable reality.
They're going to wake up.
Yes, despite the perfect wake windows, the biological alignment, and the beautiful Pavlovian routine, the baby will eventually wake up in the middle of the night. And how a parent responds in that moment brings us to the most complex, heavily debated, and emotionally charged section of the entire body of research: sleep training.
This is an area where we must look exclusively at the behavioral mechanics and the biological outcomes presented in the data.
Absolutely. And as we dive into this, let's be incredibly clear about the framework of this discussion. We are analyzing two distinct behavioral pathways identified in the research. We are looking at the physiological trade-offs of each.
Right.
We are not establishing a moral hierarchy, and we are not endorsing one philosophy over another. Our focus is entirely on the biological realities of how infants learn to connect sleep cycles.
With that analytical frame, let's examine the first pathway outlined in the data, which is often colloquially referred to as no sleep training.
The research prefers the terms responsive or attachment-based sleep management, because no sleep training sounds like you are just doing nothing, which isn't true at all.
It is a highly active approach. The responsive pathway relies on continuous external regulation by the caregiver. When the baby wakes up between sleep cycles in the middle of the night, the parent immediately responds with physical intervention feeding, rocking, bouncing, or bringing the baby into the adult bed to help the infant transition into the next sleep cycle.
Let's look at the objective mechanical benefits of this responsive path. First, it involves very high immediate responsiveness to infant distress, which aligns closely with maternal instincts and evolutionary history.
Yes.
Second, from a purely logistical standpoint, it is often the path of least resistance in the middle of the night. If a baby wakes up at 3 a.m., nursing them back to sleep takes 10 minutes. Trying to soothe them without feeding might take an hour.
For a breastfeeding mother, the hormonal release of oxytocin during night feeding actually promotes her own sleepiness, allowing her to fall back asleep quickly once the baby is settled. Furthermore, this approach places zero pressure on the family to adhere to strict behavioral programs or endure periods of intense infant crying.
Those are substantial upsides. But the research is equally clear about the biological trade-offs, and it all centers around a concept we touched on earlier: sleep associations.
A sleep association is the environmental or physical condition present when the brain transitions from wakefulness to sleep. The brain categorizes this condition as the necessary prerequisite for sleep to occur.
The password for the operating system.
Exactly. If the responsive pathway is used consistently, the baby's brain establishes a rigid association. I require the physical sensation of nursing or the rhythmic motion of rocking in order to enter a sleep state. The trade-off is that infants naturally wake up slightly at the end of every 60 to 90-minute sleep cycle.
So if the password to re-enter sleep is nursing, the baby will signal for that password every single time a cycle ends.
Yes, the data shows that after the 4-month sleep maturation, the responsive approach frequently leads to high fragmentation of sleep. The baby may wake up 4, 5, or 6 times a night, requiring external intervention every time.
And the downstream effect of this is profound, compounded parental fatigue. If an adult's sleep architecture is shattered by waking up every 90 minutes for 6 months, their cognitive function, emotional regulation, and physical health deteriorate rapidly.
It's incredibly demanding.
The responsive path honors the baby's immediate preference, but it often exacts a massive physiological toll on the caregiver. Which brings us to the alternative pathway analyzed in the research: sleep training. What is the actual behavioral mechanism of sleep training?
The data clarifies a huge misconception here. Sleep training is not simply locking a door and teaching a baby to be independent.
Then what is it?
The biological goal of sleep training is the deliberate removal of external sleep associations. It is the process of allowing the infant's neurological system to practice and master the skill of transitioning between sleep cycles using only internal regulation.
Mechanically, how does that work?
It involves placing the baby in their sleep environment while they're awake, but physiologically tired, at the end of an appropriate wake window. The parent then withdraws the external soothing mechanisms. By removing the rocking or the feeding, the baby's brain is forced to find a new internal pathway to initiate sleep.
The upsides of this pathway, according to the data, are highly measurable. When an infant masters internal regulation, they consolidate their nighttime sleep much faster. They transition smoothly between sleep cycles without fully waking, resulting in longer, deeper, uninterrupted stretches of restorative sleep for both the baby and the parents. It also introduces high predictability into the family schedule.
However, the trade-offs for this pathway are significant and require immense parental resilience. The primary trade-off is the infant's behavioral protest.
The crying.
Yes. Because you have abruptly changed the password to the operating system, the infant's brain experiences confusion and frustration. They protest the removal of the external association. Enduring this protest requires strict, unwavering consistency from the parents.
Consistency is key here.
Intermittent reinforcement, giving in and rocking the baby after an hour of crying, is mathematically the worst thing you can do, as it teaches the baby that prolonged crying is the new requirement to get the sleep association.
Furthermore, the training pathway requires a temporary sacrifice of flexibility. To build the new internal association, the environment must be identical every night. You can't train a baby while traveling or staying late at a restaurant, or if they are sick. You are bound to the crib and the clock until the skill is mastered.
And here's where the research distills this entire agonizing debate into a singular, profound framework. It removes the emotional weight entirely. It presents this not as a battle of good parenting versus bad parenting, but simply as a choice between two valid structural paths.
Path A and Path B. Let's lay them out. Path A is support to independence. You take active behavioral steps to teach the neurological skill of self-regulation. The trade-off is short-term behavioral protest in exchange for long-term sleep consolidation.
And Path B is development-led independence. You provide continuous external regulation, trusting that as the child's brain matures over months or years, the internal regulation will naturally emerge on its own timeline. The trade-off is long-term sleep fragmentation and parental fatigue in exchange for high, immediate responsiveness.
The defining conclusion of the data is that neither path is a failure. Assuming a baseline of a loving, safe home, children on both paths eventually learn to sleep. The choice is entirely about which set of trade-offs a family can sustainably tolerate.
That reframing is incredible. You aren't choosing between right and wrong, you're choosing your hard, which naturally transitions us into the final section of our analysis today, the overarching fears, the flexibility, and the big picture.
Right, because even when you understand the mechanics of Path A and Path B, you are still haunted by existential questions as a parent.
The unasked questions, the anxieties that keep parents awake even when the baby is sleeping. The research addresses these directly, starting with the heaviest psychological fear surrounding sleep training, the fear of emotional harm.
Right. Am I going to permanently damage my baby's attachment to me if I let them cry during sleep training? What does the behavioral data actually say about this?
The data provides a very clear distinction between frustration and trauma. When sleep training is implemented appropriately, meaning the baby is fed, dry, safe, and loved, the crying is a behavioral expression of frustration at a change in routine, not a trauma response.
It's the frustration of learning a difficult new skill, like learning to walk and falling down.
Exactly. More importantly, the research clarifies the concept of secure attachment. Secure attachment is a macro-level psychological structure. It is built through thousands of interactions, consistent daytime care, eye contact, physical affection responding to hunger or playing. A securely attached infant learns their caregiver is a reliable source of safety.
So, setting a specific localized boundary around nighttime sleep mechanics does not suddenly erase the macro level reality of that daytime love.
It does not. The research contrasts the temporary frustration of sleep training with chronic, systemic neglect, which is a complete absence of care across all domains. They are biologically and psychologically entirely different phenomena.
Another massive question parents grapple with, which the research addresses beautifully, is the evolutionary context. People say sleep training isn't natural. For thousands of years, humans slept in tribal groups, huddled together around a fire. The baby was always attached to a mother.
And that evolutionary history is entirely accurate. Constant physical proximity was the historical norm because it was a requirement for survival against predators and the elements.
But the data pivots to look at the modern environment. We do not live in tribal groups around a fire.
We live in a highly constructed modern society. We sleep in separate, climate-controlled rooms. We do not have a village of aunts and grandmothers living in the same dwelling to pass the baby around so the mother can sleep during the day. We have nuclear families, alarms that go off at 6 a.m., and 40-hour work weeks that demand high cognitive function.
So sleep training isn't an attempt to be unnatural. It is an intentional behavioral adaptation. We are trying to fit ancient evolutionary infant biology into the rigid constraints of a 21st century society. We have to teach them a skill early because our modern environment demands it for survival.
Which brings up a very practical question. What if it doesn't work? What if my baby is just biologically incapable of learning to self-regulate?
The research is remarkably reassuring here. It notes that true failures in sleep training are almost never due to an innate flaw in the baby's neurological capacity. When it fails, it is almost always a failure of the system or the timing.
The most common systemic failure is attempting to train an overtired baby. If a parent ignores the wake windows during the day and the baby's system is flooded with cortisol at 7 p.m., they physically cannot learn the skill of self-regulation. Their brain is in emergency mode.
The other major point of failure is parental inconsistency, the intermittent reinforcement we talked about. If the rules change every night, depending on how tired the parent is, the baby's brain cannot identify the pattern. The failure isn't the baby. The failure is the noise in the data being provided to the baby.
Which leads perfectly into the ultimate synthesis of the research, the big picture truths that conclude our data set. These are the fundamental principles that govern infant sleep, regardless of whether a family chooses the responsive path or the training path.
Truth number one,
Okay.
you are not installing sleep. You aren't plugging a USB drive into the baby's brain and downloading a software update. You are supporting a developing biological system. Your role is not to force an outcome. Your role is to reduce environmental friction managing light, temperature, and timing so the baby's natural biology can do its work.
Truth number two, consistency matters infinitely more than perfection. The infant brain does not understand precision. It does not know if bedtime is at 7:00 p.m. or 7:14 p.m. It learns through broad, reliable patterns. If the sequence of events leading to sleep is generally the same, the brain will adapt, even if the timing fluctuates slightly.
Truth number three, and this is a big one, temperament is the invisible variable. The research states that innate temperament is a massive factor in how a baby sleeps. Some babies are naturally easygoing. They have flexible nervous systems that adapt quickly to change. Other babies are highly sensitive, reacting intensely to every environmental shift.
And the crucial insight is that a highly sensitive temperament is not a defect to be fixed. It is a biological reality to be managed. You cannot train a highly sensitive baby to become an easygoing baby. You can only provide them with more rigorous structure to help them feel secure.
And finally, the most critical truth in the entire body of research, the one that often gets completely lost in the anxiety of parenting. Parental well-being is an inextricable component of the infant sleep system.
We have a cultural tendency to view infant sleep entirely through the lens of the baby's needs, treating the parent as a sacrificial machine. But biologically, the infant regulates their nervous system by mirroring the caregiver's nervous system.
If the parent is chronically sleep-deprived, deeply resentful, and vibrating with anxiety, the infant's nervous system detects that threat. A regulated, well-rested parent is physically more capable of soothing a baby than a parent who is falling apart.
The research states explicitly, if an approach is ostensibly working for the baby, but it is breaking the parent physically or psychologically. It is not actually a functional system.
You cannot separate the health of the caregiver from the environment of the child. They are a single, closed biological loop.
It all culminates in a truly beautiful concluding thought from the researchers. Independence isn't rushed. It is revealed. You are not creating independence out of thin air through sheer force of will. You are simply building the scaffolding, providing the predictable structure, and allowing the child's natural neurological maturity to emerge safely within that space.
It shifts the entire paradigm from a battle of wills to a process of biological unfolding. What a profound way to look at human development. Okay, as we wrap up this massive deep dive, let's run through the core mechanical takeaways. Number one, follow the biology over the clock. Rigid structure is a physiological impossibility until the circadian rhythm forms around 2 to 4 months.
Number 2, respect the biological engine of the wake windows to avoid the cascade of cortisol and overtiredness.
Number three, utilize physics and psychology to design an evening rhythm that signals sleep through consistent environmental patterns.
And number 4, choose a nighttime response pathway, whether it is responsive support or structured training that aligns with your family's capacity, and execute it with unwavering consistency.
It is a phenomenal, deeply logical roadmap through what often feels like total chaos.
It really is. And looking at all of this data leaves me with a final thought to ponder, one that extends far beyond infancy. We've spent this time seeing how trying to force a newborn onto a strict, arbitrary timetable completely backfires because it ignores their underlying neurological and chemical reality. We accept that babies are governed by biology. It makes you wonder, how often do we make this exact same arrogant mistake later in life? Whether it's our expectations for a toddler's emotional regulation or a teenager's sleep needs, or even our own productivity as adults. We constantly try to discipline our way out of exhaustion. How much daily frustration could we save ourselves if we stopped trying to forcefully discipline human behavior and started aligning with our own human biology instead?
Wow. Aligning with biology instead of disciplining behavior. That is the exact tension we started with applied to the rest of our lives. You definitely don't get a clean, linear operating manual when you bring a baby home, or honestly, for any stage of being human, but understanding the biological machinery running underneath. That is infinitely more powerful than any rigid schedule. Thank you so much for exploring this with us on the deep dive. We will catch you next time.